All right, we're back for week 3 of Processing Blue. We got the man Mike K back. Had Scott Fowler last week. You playing hooky on me, man. What happened?
I think I was in the hot summer sun of
You had to sweat a little bit.
yeah, that was last week in particular was brutally hot, and I think my mind melted. I don't even remember last week at this point. I've got my notes, but it was so hot.
What is Spartanburg like to somebody who's not used to it and new to it? What is that like?
Who's never been there? I mean, I really like downtown. I thought it was kind of cool.
No, the weather.
Oh,
I
the
know
weather.
the
I
weather.
mean, I was talking to somebody about this the other day who's from Jacksonville, but Jacksonville's hot. Jacksonville's not
Yeah.
Spartanburg hot, and it's just. I mean, you feel it. I told our editor the other day. I was just like, I don't know what to do because I just it's too hot.
Yeah.
And look, I try to hydrate as much as possible, but that
Right.
weather is brutal.
No, it's like putting on a blanket when you walk outside. It's like you take a shower, but it's like, what's the point? As
Right.
soon as you go outside, you're sweating. But Mike, let's talk about little Panthers. Big move this week. They signed a 4-time Pro Bowler, Justin Houston, to a 1-year deal worth up to $7 million. This guy's got 111 and a half sacks in his career. He once had 22 for the Chiefs about 9 years ago. He's 34 years old. Is he going to have anything left for the Panthers this year?
Was a 35-year-old. I think he is young and spry. No, listen, he's coming off a 9.5 sack season with Baltimore. He's a rotational pass rusher. You've got Marquise Haynes, who's dealing with a back injury, so he was the favorite to start prior to Houston signing. Houston will get 6 million, guaranteed here.
Mhm.
That's starter money. That's number 2 edge money. And so I think what you'll see is Justin Houston and Brian Burns are those two main guys at edge. You'll see Marquise Haynes rotate in. We'll see what they think of Yitar Gross-Matos. He's kind of an odd fit in this scheme. We've written about it a bunch of times. We've talked about it a bunch of times. They've had 2 guys in Kobe Jones, a practice squad holdover, and then undrafted rookie Iko Leota, who have outplayed third-round pick DJ Johnson to this point. What I
Mhm.
do think is interesting about this Justin Houston signing, and I've written about this before when I did my thoughts on the rookies and we talked during the first podcast, I thought DJ Johnson was put in a spot that was kind of unfair for him.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's turning 25 in October, but he's
Right.
kind of a project, and he probably shouldn't be forced out onto the field because that doesn't really help anyone. So having Justin Houston coming in gives DJ Johnson the opportunity for maybe a redshirt year,
Richard, yeah, yeah,
yeah, or
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
like a redshirt first half of the season, which I think is
Mhm.
great.
Well, Panther fans remember, Lamar Lathan and Kevin Green, the salt and pepper, where the both linebackers got a ton of sacks. So we're going to see that this year. We're going to get a lot of sacks on both ends from these guys. You think?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, and as you mentioned, Dom Capers' defense historically, which Ejiro Evero has basically adopted, needs 2
Hmm.
pass rushers to really make it work. And
Right.
yeah, I do think, if Justin Houston comes in and maybe doesn't get 9.5 sacks, but he gets 6.5 or 7.5 sacks, that's well worth that $6 million. And I think they've played this whole market pretty well. We saw Yannick Ngakoue get 10 million from Chicago. We saw Leonard Floyd get 7 million with 9 million, with 2 million more in incentives. The Panthers didn't pay that, and they paid it for a guy who had comparable numbers last year. Yeah, he's 34, but you view this as a 1-year rental because in a perfect world, DJ Johnson is ready next year.
Right.
You have some other younger guys that can maybe develop. This is a stopgap bridge sort of pass rusher who's been extremely productive, and I think you have him coming in right ahead of the Jets joint practices, right ahead of the preseason. He's probably not going to need a lot of preseason work. He's played in a 3-4 for most of his career. He fits. He's not going to have to learn a ton. Just let him go out there and rush. And I think he can really help Brian Burns because it's really hard to cover, I mean, to block both of these guys. And if you can move
Hmm.
them around from the weak side to the strong side and vice versa, and you can blitz with Frankie Louvu, they're going to send a bunch of fireballs, as Andy Reid used to say, towards the opposing offense.
Can they stop the run, Mike? That's been a consistent problem here in Carolina. We did the 3-4 thing one time before. It didn't work out too well. Can they stop the run with this group?
Well, I'll say this. Houston's a much better and much more well-rounded run defender than uh, than Yannick Ngakoue, and I think a lot of people wanted Yannick Ngakoue because of his sack numbers. I
Mhm.
think the Panthers did right by themselves in going after Justin Houston, who can play against the run, but he's also a rotational pass rusher. So
Mhm.
you're going to need to get production against the run out of Marquise Haynes. You're going to need to get production out of Yetur Gross-Matos. You're going to need to get production out of those other guys. And I think that's a question that still needs to be answered. It's kind of impossible to really say whether they're going to be this group that can do both. And I think that's something we need to watch out for in the preseason.
All right, let me flip you around and let's talk about offense a little bit. Scott was in last week and we talked about Bryce Young having, 4 interceptions in 4 straight practices. And I asked Scott, was that a problem? He said, not a problem at all. What do you think about Bryce Young so far? I know he looked good a little bit in practices last week. What are your thoughts so far?
I think he's looked very good. I mean, he's a rookie. He looks. There are times where he looks like a rookie, but what I think is encouraging is if you look at all six or what is it, all six of his interceptions during the summer, it's really been like every single one of them is different. Like there's nothing that's like very similar. Like the most similar ones were the pick that happened yesterday in practice on Sunday, and his first pick of practice training camp
Mhm.
practice, where he had a miscommunication with a wide receiver who wasn't in the area and threw a ball directly to C.J. Henderson on both of these picks up the seam.
Mhm.
That's going to happen. He's young. They're installing plays. I think he's looked really accurate. I mean, he's thrown, if math off the top of my head is correct, he's thrown 105 11 on 11 passes, and he's completed 67 of them for around a 64 point
Mhm.
something percentage. Sorry, I'm a
Mhm.
journalist, not a math major. But I mean,
In the neighborhood.
he had like kind of a light workload on Sunday, but
Yeah.
on Saturday, as of Saturday, he completed 65 of 100 passes, and I think that's right where you want it to be, especially as he's learning. He's making the mistakes when he should be making those mistakes, and he doesn't really make the same mistake twice. So I think for the Panthers, you should feel really encouraged. And if you think about some of the drops that have happened in training camp, he's had like Saturday, he went 7 of 15, but he threw
Mhm.
3 perfect passes that were dropped, 2 of which were for touchdowns. So your stat line looks a little bit different, right? If you have everybody
No,
supporting you.
Panther fans they used to drop passes. They lived through Ted Ginn dropping touchdown passes from Cam Newton. They've seen some of that. But Mike, are you concerned looking at him get hit? Does he get hit and you guys all kind of go, is he going to get up?
Well, he hasn't gotten hit in practice because he can't, right?
Well, you can
Like,
hit him up.
but yeah, I mean, look, when I was watching his film, I mean, it was like watching a tank run over like a small dog. It was like a
Mhm.
very, it's like a jarring image.
Yeah.
And he's this tiny guy. There's no question about it. If a guy like, Chris Jones from the Chiefs sacks him, it's going to look horrifying, especially if he falls on him. That
Right.
said, I mean, he played in the SEC. Like, I mean, I don't. The Panthers clearly aren't concerned, but I
Right.
don't. We won't know until it happens, right? Like, it's a difficult situation to kind of project because so many things have to factor in. He was only injured 1 game in college, and Nick Saban blamed it on Bryce for trying to do too much.
Too much. Right. Right.
And
I
so
remember.
I think when we look at his injury concerns, he's just going to have to be smart with the ball. He hasn't really run it a lot. We were at
Hmm.
practice the other day, and a fan behind me, after he took off for an unusual run for 2 yards and went out of bounds, the guy yelled out something to the effect of, "Man, I never want to see that guy run ever." Like, and I thought that was really funny, but I think it is indicative of the concern of he is a smaller guy, but I got to tell you, he's confident in the pocket. He doesn't really get rattled. There are times where he'll make a poor decision or a poor throw, but everybody does that. Peyton Manning had several interceptions his rookie year. I
Right.
mean,
28 of them.
yeah, he's going to learn. Listen, like I've been asked on radio shows if I'm concerned about like he had 5 straight practices with an interception. I once covered Blake Bortles, who threw 5 interceptions in one training camp practice, and months later he was in the AFC Championship game.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
my belief in tracking stuff, as you can see in our breakdowns every day of practice, is for context, right? And so I can get context on every interception. I can get context on every completion and incompletion. I can understand what's going on. Now, I don't have all the context, right? Like, I don't know the play
Right.
call, but
Right.
it's all about context. This isn't about judging Bryce Young and his performance, because we won't know how he can perform until he actually takes meaningful snaps. Like, even the preseason is going to be a little bit of a dress rehearsal.
Right.
So I'm interested to see how all this turns out.
You talked about Young having some interceptions. Is that to mean the defense has been getting the better of the offensive league?
Yeah, and that's not unusual. Typically, the offense is trying to install a bajillion plays, and the defense is really mostly reacting in their shells coverage or playing to their technique. There's so much more that goes into offense. Defense, it's more reactionary, and that's why I'm really interested to see what happens during these jet joint practices the next few days
Mm-hmm.
and the preseason game, because Bryce. I'm not saying he has, like, when you play poker with the same guy every weekend, you know what his tells are, right? I'm not
That's
saying
right.
Bryce has tells, but when you've gone up against the same guy every single practice,
Their
yeah, there
tendencies.
are tendencies, right? And
Yeah.
so I think when we look at this whole summer, everything's been building towards this. They've been installing plays. They've been practicing how to practice, right? Now they
Right.
get to
Right.
go up against the defense that has Quentin Williams and Carl Lawson, DJ Reed, Sauce Gardner, Jordan Whitehead, Jermaine Johnson, Willie McDonald, who they loved here, and
Mm-hmm.
could have been an option if he fell in the first round. He didn't. He got drafted in the teens, but he could have been a trade up option. And this is a
Right.
completely different offseason, right?
Right. Right.
Um, he is going to have the deck stacked against him. Let's see if he can be Alabama Bryce and kind of move around the pocket and do some of the interesting stuff. One note I will give you: he is not testing the field deep. It's something he has not
Oh,
done at all. It's almost
okay.
like they're trying to process the short to intermediate game because they know he can throw the ball downfield. They know he has escapability and he
Mm-hmm.
can improvise. It's almost like they're like retooling him from a short to intermediate range, because all throughout the offseason program, he made these incredible downfield strikes. He hasn't really tested that yet. He only has about 4 touchdowns.
If I'm concerned about my offensive line, I don't want to hold the ball to let a guy run down the field. I mean, maybe I don't.
Well, sure. And to that point, on Saturday, Taylor Motton the right tackle got a day off, and boy, could you tell. They were Iko Leota, the undrafted rookie, got at
Yeah.
least 3 pressures, at least 2 would be sacks. Kobe Jones got pressures. Brian Burns was relentless. Like, that was a real. I mean, like, the fact that Bryce even completed as many passes as he did, I mean, it was pretty astonishing. But um, yeah, I mean, there are questions. I mean, I think this offensive line was a little overrated last year, but now not having their best offensive lineman in right guard Austin Corbett, it makes things interesting. I think Cade Mays has done a pretty good job
Mm-hmm.
filling in the second year.
Does Corbin come back soon, or you think it'll be like mid-season?
Well, he said yesterday. Scott did a story on him today. You can check out in the CharlotteObserver.com. Wonderful website, $1 subs.
That's right.
He said that he wasn't sure if he was going to be back in week 1. He was pretty sure he wouldn't be.
Okay.
I'm anticipating him being on the pup list entering
Mm-hmm.
the season, and if that were to happen, that's just
Mm-hmm.
a guess, just my vibe,
Right.
not a report. But if that were to happen, he'd miss the first 4 games of the regular
4 weeks.
season.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's fine. I mean, you don't want to rush him back too early. He's not obviously going to play in the preseason, so you're going to want to build him up. And I think that that's
A lot of short passes if he doesn't play the first 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. That's why I'm interested to see Cade Mays versus Quinnen Williams, because that's a matchup that's kind of scary on paper. I think they have some pretty good edge rushers in Carl Lawson, McDonald, and Johnson. They'll be able to throw guys at him. Solomon Thomas is a veteran who can move in and out of the lineup. That's going to be a nice challenge for Brady Christensen.
Yeah.
The Jets are stacked, and Robert Saleh calls a great defense. I covered him when he was a linebackers coach in Jacksonville. I covered Nate Hackett, their offensive coordinator, for several years in Jacksonville. I know he's caught a lot of criticism for what went down in Denver, but he's also the guy that hired Ejiro Evero, who became
Mhm.
a prime candidate as a defensive coordinator 1 year later again after just 1 year as a defensive coordinator in Denver.
Let's talk about the receivers. If Bryce is going to have a big season, these guys are going to hold on to the ball. One guy who looked good late last year under Steve Wilkes was Terrence Marshall. I saw you had him on Twitter making a really pretty toe tapper in the corner end zone the other day. What are you seeing out of him? Is he going to have a breakout season?
I think he's a guy who's primed for it. I mean, the other day Frank Reich said that he could get off press coverage. He's fast. He's got good size. All this other stuff. The problem with him
Yeah,
last year really was he wasn't really playing to his size. He had one like garbage time touchdown against the Bengals in that awful blowout in Cincinnati.
yeah, yeah.
But he did average quite a bit of yards per catch. I think it was around 17 yards, which is among the tops in the league. He's a guy who's got good size at 6'2". He's 200 pounds. He can, he's one of those LSU guys. Like, he's got great speed, great size, great length. It's just putting it all together. DJ Chark was a guy who matured very quickly in Jacksonville, who also went to LSU and has very comparable traits. I think that year 3 could be the year. Now, they drafted Jonathan Mingo in the second round. Those two guys have kind of ebbed and flowed in momentum. Like, Jonathan Mingo had like a really good first 3 practices, and Terrace Marshall, you kind of forgot even played for the team. And then
Wow.
since then, it's been all Terrace Marshall all the time, and Mingo's kind of had some blunders. I brought up the drops the other day. Bryce Young threw like an epically perfect pass into the end zone to Mingo, and he dropped it. Like, it was rough.
Yeah,
But like,
yeah,
I think they're going to rotate at that X position. I think DJ Chark is greatly exceeded expectations after
yeah.
signing a 1-year, $5 million deal. I mean, he is beating guys deep. His ability to track the ball is just fun. Like,
Yeah, Scott really raved about him last week. Talked about he's kind of been Bryce's blanket. His favorite blanket that he could always go to.
yeah.
But Mike, look, you put a note out on Twitter. We got some questions for Kay, and I want to shoot them to you. Number one, how does Miles Sanders look so far?
He's looked good. He's run with authority. He had a bit of a tweak the other day in practice for an undisclosed body part, but then returned on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that just, I mean, he's a one-cut runner who can catch the ball. He's had some struggles in the past, but he's looked good as a receiver in this stretch of practices. Excuse me. And I think he's not going to be a bell cow, because that's not what Frank Reich believes in. It's not what Deuce Staley believes in. It's not what Thomas Brown believes in. He is a guy who is just going to touch the ball a lot, and I think he's set up to succeed here.
How did the Panthers use Yetur Gross-Matos now after the signing of Justin Houston?
So they're kind of just trying to figure out where he fits. He's a really awkward fit for a 4-3 defense, but as like most defenses in the league, they will have 4-3 looks. They want to throw as much as they can at opposing offenses. They want to be multiple, which is coaches speak for, hey, we just want to use a bunch of different lineups.
That's right.
But like I said, he's kind of an awkward fit for a 3-4 defense. They have him kind of rushing inside a little bit. They have him rushing outside when they have the 4-3 looks. It'll be interesting to see how this move impacts them, because really, like, they're in a spot where they can just rotate Marquise Haynes and Justin Houston opposite Brian Burns and just kind of go with minimal young developing depth behind him. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the preseason and if Yetur Gross-Matos gets moved.
We got this question from 3 different people. Can Deion Jones become a defensive starter for the Panthers this season?
I think they'll have different packages where it'll depend on the matchup. Ejiro Evero seems like a really cerebral guy and a guy who kind of wants to mix and match personnel. Right now they have Frankie Luvu and Shaq Thompson starting inside. I think signing Houston kind of helps them, because while Luvu can move outside, he's not really a natural edge rusher. He's more of a blitzer. They're 2 different personality types to the position. They're 2 different aspects, as you know. And this allows Frankie to stay inside, and I think his ability to blitz makes this defense better, because you don't know where he's coming from as that 11th man. I think there will be packages where, they do run kind of a 4-3 look, and it puts Deion Jones on the field more. I think they really like his range. He's impressed the last couple of days, and I think they like what he does in coverage. I could see them going to him as a dime linebacker. Originally, that seemed like that was like going to be a Jeremy Chin role. I actually think Deion Jones would be much better off in that position.
Okay.
And then you have Camus Hill, who has just made play after play during training camp. He's a special teams ace. I think they go 4 or 5 deep at inside linebacker, and I think Deion Jones will get a lot of playing time, whether he starts games or not. I don't really know if that matters.
Right.
Yeah, so
As long as you're out on the field when it counts. The last question comes from somebody who's probably traumatized by seeing Mike Evans run by the Panthers over and over again last year against Tampa Bay. But if J.C. Horn goes down with another injury, is it all going to fall apart in the secondary?
I mean, as of now, yeah. I mean, I think CJ Henderson's had
That's not the right answer, Mike.
I think as of right now, CJ Henderson's had the best camp of any of the corners, which is a really
Okay.
great sign.
Yeah.
He had his 5th-year option declined, and he said that he came back with a new edge. I think they feel good about him. Keith Taylor, who had a really rough game against the Steelers, if you remember last year,
Yeah, I remember.
is playing very well to his size. I think Jonathan Cooley, the cornerbacks coach, and obviously D'Angelo Hall, the assistant cornerbacks coach, have done a really good job with this group. Stanley Thomas Oliver is a guy who's got versatility. So I think they like the group. I don't think they love it from a depth standpoint, but I do think having CJ Henderson is kind of like a 2B starter behind JC Horn and Dante Jackson's really important. Look, JC Horn's a top 10 corner in this league. Anytime you lose a top 10 corner, you're gonna take lumps, right? Like Dante Jackson going down, I don't know if they're as like even close to as concerned. JC Horn's really the crown jewel of that secondary, but I think they have a really good safety tandem in Von Bell and Xavier Woods. People have raved about their communication skills, their ability to put people in the right places. And I think that does help, especially if you do need to go to depth corners. It'll help improve the communication back there. So I don't think it'll be as bad, but I think losing JC Horn is just like going to be nuclear to this defense if that were to happen again.
Nuclear is not a really good answer. All right, before we get out of here, we got to go to my favorite part of the show. It's time for K's Takes. What do you have, Mike?
Well, I figured we could talk about 3 guys heading into the preseason that I think are really, really interesting. And I think their roster spots really hang in the balance of how well they play. So the first guy is undrafted pass rusher Iku Leota, who's from Asheville, went to Northwestern and Auburn. He's done a really, really nice job this week. I don't know that any undrafted players helped themselves out in Panthers camp as much as Leota has done. He had 3 pressures during FanFest. He had at least 2 would-be sacks the very next practice. He's just kind of been everywhere, and I think he's a guy who will play well when the pads come on and the hits are live. Another guy that I really like on the edge is Kobe Jones. He's a practice squad holdover, went to Mississippi State. He bounced around a little bit over the last couple of years, looking for a home. He's really impressed me. And sometimes you get to the point where you have only like 3 guys who are going to play a lot, but you have 3 guys that you feel like are rosterable behind them. And so you say, look, we only want to keep 5 guys. What do we do with this other guy? Sometimes you can, if you need help at corner, let's say, and another team could potentially cut another corner, maybe you skip the waiver wire and you swap guys, right? He's a guy that I think can earn his way onto a 53-man roster, even if it's not the Panthers with a really strong preseason. And then let's talk about the offensive line, right? We brought that up earlier. Nash Jensen, an undrafted rookie from North Dakota State, who was getting raves from the coaching staff even before they arrived in training camp. That dude is nasty. He is like an old school, like Jordan Gross style offensive lineman. He wants to run you over and affect your life. I mean, he is a bulldozer. We talked about the tank running over Bryce Young. This dude is a just mauler. He's an old school dude, and I really dig that. And it seems like the coaching staff really does too. Chandler Zavala's been out of practice up until a couple of days ago, the 4th-round pick, with a hamstring injury, and I think that Jensen's done a really nice job of taking advantage of extra reps. He's a guy who, look, this is a team that had, they've had offensive linemen in the past go from undrafted free agents to really, really strong players. I'm trying to remember his name. My brain is just like not working. Their old left guard who started in the Super Bowl for them. He signed with Jacksonville while I was there. Oh, was it Andrew Norman?
No. Norwood?
Andrew Norwell, right?
Norwell.
Wait, I got to look this up because this is going to drive me crazy now. Um, but uh, yeah, I mean, I think that this is a guy who has some upside that can play really well, and it helps to have some of the Andrew Norwell. Look at
Yeah,
me.
that helps. Hey, you got it.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
look, he went from being an undrafted rookie out of Ohio State to being an All Pro for a Super Bowl team, and I think that that's kind of impressive. I'm not saying that's Jensen's upside, but I do think he is a guy who.
I was gonna say, should the fourth round pick NC State kid feel a little nervous?
Well, you know what? It's very interesting you say that because it does kind of feel like some of these guys that we've just talked about have put a lot of pressure on third round pick DJ Johnson and fourth round pick, Chandler Zavala. And,
Yeah,
Iku Leota and Nash Jensen are both undrafted free agents. So that's kind of interesting.
yeah, competition. Before we get out of here, I asked Mike last week. Bucky Brooks thinks the Panthers are going to win the NFC South. 30 seconds. What do you think?
I think they will be very competitive. Uh, I think the Saints are a little bit better just because they have some familiarity with the staff. I think it'll be really competitive to the end, but I have the Panthers right now before the preseason going 9-8. And I think
Nine
you're going to need 10 wins to win this division, unlike last year.
9-8, he says. All right, there it is from Mike K. Week 3 of Processing Blue. Make sure you follow, like, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you come back next week, and we'll be talking about some real football next week.
Yeah. I mean, depending on your opinion of the preseason.
A little bit of real football. I'm Langston. That's Mike. This is Processing Blue. We'll catch you next week.